Hello and welcome to my channel Malavika's Magic. Today I'll be sharing with you my views on how to interpret nonverbal communication part 2. So in my previous video, I discussed about kinesis, that is body language, and now we move on to the other aspects of nonverbal communication that would help us to determine its importance. Let us start with proxemics. Proxemics is the study of space between the sender and the receiver in interpersonal relations, and it also is indicative of the behavior of the sender towards the receiver. That is, the sender could either be dominating towards the receiver or could also be in a friendly manner. So let us discuss the different zones that we tend to use while we are communicating. So first is the intimate zone. Here, the sender communicates with family members, with the relatives, and so therefore the distance between the sender and the receiver starts from personal touch to 1.5 feet. So we can understand the close bonding that is shared between the sender and the receiver, and this helps us to determine the amount of trust that the sender and the receiver have towards each other and the sense of belonging that they have towards each other. So the best example could be the relationship between the mother and the child, whereby the mother moves closer to the child in order to express her emotions and in order to express her affection towards the child. Now, let us understand the next zone, that is the personal zone. The personal zone takes place when the sender is communicating with close friends or colleagues in an organization. And this zone indicates that this is a casual relationship and it is informal setting. And so, therefore, the body movements of either both the sender and the receiver is not given much importance. It is spontaneous, and moreover, the distance between the sender and the receiver, begins from 1.5 feet to 4 feet. And the sender most of the time tends to move closer to the receiver in order to understand the receiver, to build relationship, and to develop contact with the receiver. Now let us move on to the social setting. The social setting is that the distance between the sender and receiver starts from 4 feet to 12 feet. And this is considered to be a formal situation. It is official. And so therefore, the sender and the receiver, they have to be very careful about their body movements. In fact, the sender and the receiver, both of them take care to display only those body movements that is acceptable in this particular situation. Next comes the public zone. And the sender in this zone, the distance between the sender and the receiver starts from 12 feet to 30 feet. So we can understand that there is a huge distance between the sender and the receiver. It is a very formal situation, and the sender normally addresses a large audience. And while addressing the large audience, the sender doesn't have any control over the audience. The audience can behave in any manner while communicating, and thus the sender, the receivers, they are very comfortable as they can behave in any manner. But sometimes the sender needs to increase his volume so that he is able so that the receivers hear him, so the receivers are able to understand him. And after understanding proxemics, let us now move on to chronemics. Chronemics is the importance assigned to the use of time or the value of time. So let us understand that every region and every country will assign their own importance to the concept of time, to the value of time, and it could vary from country to country. So, for example, in Indian situation, we are very flexible with the time factor. So we do not mind if an event, commences late. So because we are used to the flexibility, or we are accustomed to the delay in the commencement of the event. But this may not be the case in other countries where a lot of importance is given to time, as they consider that if the commencement is delayed, then it is a sign of irresponsible behavior. It is a sign of casual behavior, and it is of course a sign of not being punctual. So therefore, it is not considered to be a good signal or a positive signal that is being transmitted to the receiver. Now, sometimes, the chronemics would also determine, the use of time could also determine whether we can maintain a relationship or we can break a relationship. Just for example, a salesperson, if he does not give importance to the time, does not adhere to the time of his client, then he might lose a client in the process. So having understood time, let us understand the next aspect, that is paralinguistic features. Paralinguistic features are the vocal cues that are transmitted by the sender while uttering a word, while speaking. So they depend on various factors. So let us start with volume first. Volume is the ability of the sender to either, to increase or to decrease depending upon the size of the audience. So if there is a larger audience, automatically the sender will increase his volume so that, he is being heard by all of them. If it is a smaller audience, he will lower his volume so that I know the receivers are comfortable, because if he increases the volume, with a smaller audience, it would indicate his aggressive behavior. At the same time, his desire to control the receivers. So having understood volume, let us now move on to the pitch. The pitch is the variation of this of the sound per second. And this pitch is important because it will indicate whether we are happy or whether we are sad. A higher pitch would indicate that we are excited, we are happy, whereas a lower pitch would indicate that we are sad. And then the next part is when we should modulate our pitch, or rather we should have a control over a pitch so that we are more effective when we are communicating with the receivers. The next is the pace or the rate. The pace or the rate at which we utter the number of words that we speak in a per minute. So this would vary from person to person, but the usual rate is that the people speak 120 to 150 words in a minute. And the pace and the rate will ultimately determine whether the person is boring or monotonous, or whether the person is being very interesting. While speaking, in the public, if the speaker, tends to be very slow, it would be indicated that he is very boring and monotonous. Whereas if the speaker speaks very fast, it would indicate that he is being nervous or he is in a hurry to complete his part. But we have to understand that this pace and rate would ultimately depend upon the context. That is, we should have a proper understanding of the sender before we arrive at any conclusions. It may not be the case that this person is nervous because he or she speaks fast. It could be his style of speaking, and therefore he might be used to that particular style, and it may not be possible for him or her to, try and speak in a different manner. So one should understand the person who is the sender before, arriving at certain conclusions. Then comes the articulation. The articulation is the way we utter a particular word in a situation, how we utter that word, and it is very important that we utter clearly so that the receiver could interpret it also correctly, and therefore there will be no miscommunication in the process. The pronunciation is the awareness of how the word is pronounced in universally or accepted universally. That awareness is required. Otherwise, it could lead to various confusion. For example, I have heard many people pronouncing H-O-U-R as har and not as R because it is the influence of their mother tongue. And in the mother tongue, the consonant, the first consonant is cannot be silent, and so therefore they cannot. They have accustomed to such pronunciation, and therefore they find it very difficult to pronounce it in the correct manner or in the accepted manner. But we have to understand that different languages have different use of consonants, and so thus, an awareness of the particular language is necessary when we use the pronunciation. And then comes a voice modulation. The voice modulation is related to the rise and fall in a tone depending upon the importance that we want to give to the message, or depending upon the emphasis that we want to give to a particular word or a particular phrase or a particular sentence. And so this voice modulation is again necessary in order to draw the audience to your talk, or just to allow the audience to just feel bored or just go off to sleep. Then comes the pauses. The pauses are the sender takes while uttering two words or in between two words or in between two sentences. And these pauses are necessary as it helps the receiver to reflect upon the message sent by the sender. And it also helps the sender to plan his content. Then comes the quality. The quality is of a person, the voice quality of a person will determine whether the person is able to create an impact with the audience. And so therefore we have these political leaders, who have who train their voice quality so that they have create a greater impact upon the audience. And so therefore it is necessary that we actually train ourselves so that we can draw the attention of the audience and we can be impactful at the same time. Having understood parallelistic features, let us now move on to the next aspect, that is silence. Now, silence is a non-verbal communication that has various meanings. At the same time, it could be misleading many times. So it is important for us to understand silence in the context and not in isolation. So silence could be a positive or a negative influence, or it could mean agreeing with an opinion or disagreeing with an opinion. It could also indicate anger. We are angry, therefore we are silent. So there could be various meanings attached to silent. But we need to understand silent by also observing the facial expressions of the sender as well as the hand movements of the sender. Now, let us move on to the next aspect, that is haptics. Haptics is related to the communication by touch, and it is important for us to understand that we can interpret the intentions of the person when we touch the person or when the person touches us. So it is it is required that all of us should be very sensitive to this touch in order to determine the intentions of the person. So in fact, the children nowadays, they're trained by the parents that how not to, get fooled by the facial expressions of the person or by the words that they utter. It is very important to also identify the intention of the person by when you touch him or her by in the form of shaking hands. So with this, I complete, the non-verbal signals that we tend to use, while transmitting information to the receivers or while transmitting our emotions to the receivers. Now, let us talk about the non-verbal signals that we use with the help of our sense organs in order to determine the relationships with people, in order to determine the human behavior, and also in order to determine, how we will react in a particular situation. So let's start with olfactory. Olfactics. Olfactics is a non-verbal signal that is related to smell. And this smell, our body odor could either, determine whether, somebody wants to be friendly with us or somebody wants to ignore us. Similarly, the perfume that we use, it could be quite appealing to some people, but more, and to some other people, it could be quite distracting. So we need to be very sensitive towards these issues. So human behavior could be determined by the smell. You can determine how the person, behaves in a particular situation, or what the person is like, from the choice of the perfume of the person. So if I choose a perfume that has a very strong smell, I can, you can determine the behavior of the person to be very, very, bold, aggressive. Whereas a person, who uses a mild perfume could be associated with a submissive behavior. So next we come to with the smell also, certain memories, we can recollect certain memories because we can associate the smell with, someone with whom we were very close with, and thus, we can recall those memories. It can convey emotions as well. We can convey our emotions of, for example, love or a willingness to make friendship with the smell, with the body odor, with the choice of the perfume, and it also shapes our perception. So whether we want to be in a relationship or whether we want to move away from the relationship, will finally be decided by the smell that we generally use to transmit, or by the choice of the perfume. Now the smell can also be used in order to determine, whether we prefer to do something. For example, when you go to a restaurant, the food that is offered by the waiter, from the smell itself, I could identify whether the food is fresh or the food is, like stale. So that will determine my behavior also. That will determine how I react in that particular situation. Either, I might get very angry, or I might just walk out from the restaurant without eating anything. Then the next aspect is the gustatory, that is the sense of taste. And now our tongue buds can distinguish four different tastes, that is sweetness, sourness, saltiness, and bitterness. And this taste is very important because it helps us to either, appreciate the food that we eat, or compliment someone, for the wonderful food that they have given. Now, and for people, who lose their taste buds, it might be very difficult for them, to eat and to appreciate people. And so the fact that they pretend to appreciate, could be easily identified from the other nonverbal signals that they transmit. So now let us move on to the next aspect, that is tactile, that is related to the sense of touch. So the sense of touch, we have already discussed about the touch in terms of shaking hands, but the sense of touch could also determine, to what level we are indicating our comfort. We are comforting the person, we are establishing dominance over the person, we are establishing bonds, and we are also displaying affection. This tactile is a sense of touch is very evident in animals when they want to display affection to the younger ones by licking them, or in human beings, we find that when the mother wants to show affection to her child, she holds the child very close to her heart, pats the child, caresses the child, and this way, you are displaying your affection or displaying your emotions. And then the next part is the oral, the sense of hearing. The sense of hearing, again, is very important because it is necessary for us to be very attentive, to concentrate on what words are uttered by the sender, or how the sender utters a word, because that will help us to determine the difference between two closely pronounced words, then we can interpret the correct meaning of the particular word. And this sense of hearing would enable us to also, pronounce a word correctly, and thus, it will help us in using the words in a particular context, and also understanding the meaning of the word. So having said this, I would like to thank all of you for your patient listening. I would also like to remind you that I've uploaded a quiz in the description box. So kindly have a look at the quiz, and try to solve it, so that you can get a better idea of the various, nonverbal signals that we have communicated. Thank you once again.